Have you ever wondered, could a small habit, like waking up at 5 a.m., completely change a person's life? This is the story of Thomas, a man who once had nothing, no money, no hope, and no clear future ahead of him. Each day passed in exhaustion, poverty, and the overwhelming feeling of being stuck in his own life. But then, from what seemed like a very simple decision, waking up at 5 a.m. every single day, everything began to change. In just 90 days, the life of this once hopeless man transformed completely, not only in terms of material success, but also mentally and emotionally. What really happened during those 90 days? What turned a man with nothing into someone entirely different? If you want to discover how that journey unfolded, stay with me and listen until the very end of the story. And before we begin, I have a question for you. What time is it where you're listening from right now? Where are you from? Drop a comment below. I'll be reading every single one. Thomas was a 32-year-old man living in a small town where factories seemed to run almost around the clock. He worked as a night shift security guard at a large warehouse on the edge of town. Every evening at exactly 8 p.m., when most people were already home, sitting down to a warm meal or preparing to rest after a long day, Thomas would put on his worn-out uniform and begin a shift that lasted until the next morning. His job wasn't complicated, but it was incredibly exhausting and lonely. Throughout the night, Thomas had to patrol the cold, empty rows of the warehouse, check locks, monitor security cameras, and force himself to stay awake while the entire town slept. By 6 a.m., just as the sun began to rise and people were starting their day, he would drag his heavy, tired body out of work. Thomas returned to his small rented room, completely drained. The space was cramped and suffocating, with an old fan that barely worked and a flickering light that struggled whenever the electricity weakened. He didn't even have a proper bed, just a thin mattress laid on the floor. His clothes were worn, and his shoes were old and torn in places. But what hurt Thomas the most wasn't the poverty. What truly frightened him was the feeling that his life would repeat like this forever, working hard every single day, yet never moving forward. What hurt Thomas the most wasn't just poverty, it was the feeling of being trapped in a life with no way out. Every morning, after finishing his shift and dragging himself home, he would pass by brightly lit windows. Inside, families were sitting together for breakfast, children were getting ready for school, and men in clean shirts were preparing to head off to office jobs. But Thomas was the opposite. Just as the world was waking up to live, he was returning to his small room to sleep. He had tried to change. He had applied for better jobs, but with only a high school education, most doors remained closed to him. He wanted to learn new skills, but after working through the night, his body barely had the strength to do anything except lie down. Thomas wasn't lazy. He worked hard every single day. But the more he tried, the more he realized something painful. He was working hard in a life that wasn't moving forward at all. Every week, on a familiar evening, Thomas's phone would ring. On the other end was his mother's voice, gentle, yet filled with quiet. She would always ask how he had been, whether his job was going well, and then the same question would come again, when will your life get better, Thomas? Thomas would usually fall silent for a few seconds before answering. He tried to keep his voice cheerful to reassure her, saying that everything was fine, that he was trying his best. But deep down, he knew he was just repeating the same days, over and over again. His mother never blamed him. She simply offered a soft piece of advice. You have to find a different way to live. Don't let your life pass by like this forever. Her words weren't harsh, but they lingered in his mind. Thomas understood that his mother didn't need him to be rich. She just wanted him to have a better life, a clearer future. And somehow, that made him feel even more pressure, because he didn't know where to begin if he truly wanted to change. The turning point came on a cold morning just after Thomas finished his shift. His phone kept vibrating. On the other end was his sister's panicked voice. Thomas, Mom fainted. She's in the hospital. His heart tightened instantly. Without a second thought, he rushed to catch the earliest bus back home. Throughout the long journey, his mind felt empty, filled only with fear and a crushing sense of helplessness. When he arrived, he saw his mother lying in the hospital bed. her face pale, her hands frail from years of hard work. The doctor said she was exhausted and needed rest and treatment, but the cost was a burden he wasn't sure he could handle. She held his hand weakly and said, "I don't have much time left. Don't live like me. Don't let your life pass by without meaning." In that moment, Thomas could no longer avoid the truth. He realized that if he continued living the same way, not only his life, but also the lives of those he loved would remain filled with hardship. For the first time, he felt a deep urgency to change no matter the cost. And that very moment became the beginning of a turning point. But what truly made Thomas change? What transformed his determination into real action? If you've ever felt stuck like Thomas, keep listening, because what comes next might be exactly what you need. After leaving the hospital, Thomas didn't return to the city right away like he usually did. He sat quietly outside for a long time, staring at the dark sky just before dawn. His mother's words echoed in his mind over and over. "Don't live like me. Don't let your life pass by without meaning." For the first time, he stopped avoiding the truth. He began to ask himself, if he kept living like this, 1 year from now, 5 years from now, would anything be different? And the answer terrified him. Nothing would change. On the bus ride back to town, Thomas happened to notice a middle-aged man sitting across from him. The man was neatly dressed, calm, and quietly reading a book, while everyone else around them was still half asleep. What surprised Thomas wasn't the book. It was the time. It was only around 6 a.m. Unable to hold back, Thomas asked, "Why do you wake up so early?" The man smiled and gave a simple answer. "Because early mornings are when I build my life while most people are still asleep." That sentence hit Thomas like a spark, lighting up something deep inside him. He realized that maybe the problem wasn't that he wasn't trying hard enough, but that he had been using his time the wrong way. And that chance encounter opened the door to an entirely new path. The next day, Thomas decided to call Mr. Chun. This time, he didn't want to just think or wait for a miracle. He wanted to truly begin. After adjusting his sleep schedule, at exactly 11 a.m., Thomas met him at a small cafe. Sunlight streamed through the glass windows, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was living in the daytime like everyone else. Mr. Chun looked at him and nodded. "Good. You've done what most people don't take in action." Then he pulled out a notebook and sketched a simple house. "Your life is like this house," he said. "It's falling apart not because you're lazy, but because you've never rebuilt the foundation." He then pointed to the base. "The time from 5 to 7 a.m., that's your foundation." Thomas listened carefully, each word opening a new door in his mind. 2 hours a day, Mr. Chun continued. 1 hour to learn a money-making skill. 1 hour to build yourself. If you do it consistently for 90 days, your life will be different." Thomas hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Is just 2 hours a day really enough?" Mr. Chun smiled. "It's not about whether it's enough, it's about whether you do it every single day." In that moment, Thomas realized the opportunity was already right in front of him. And if you're also waiting for a chance to change your life, keep listening, because what comes next is when Thomas truly begins to take action. Right after that meeting, Thomas didn't hesitate anymore. He began applying the exact 2-hour morning system that Mr. Chun had taught him. But this time, it was no longer just theory, it became real, minute-by-minute action. The next morning, when the alarm rang at 5 a.m., his body reacted immediately. Exhaustion, soreness, and a familiar voice whispered in his head, "Just a little more sleep won't hurt." But then he thought of his mother, remembered his promise, and he got up. Sitting at his small desk, Thomas opened his phone and began learning basic Excel lessons. After a while, he muttered to himself, "This is really hard. Can I actually do this?" Later that day, he met Mr. Chun again and admitted, "Sir, I feel like I can't keep up. Everything is too new to me." Mr. Chun looked at him calmly and said, "You don't have to be good at the beginning. You just have to not quit." Thomas fell silent for a few seconds, then asked, "But what if I fail?" Mr. Chun smiled. "The only real failure is when you stop. As long as you keep going every day, you are moving forward." Those words made Thomas realize that what truly mattered wasn't speed, It was consistency. And from that day on, every morning was no longer a battle against sleep. It became the first step in rebuilding his life. Mr. Chun didn't just offer a method, he set strict rules that Thomas had to follow if he truly wanted to change his life. The first rule, he said, is no exceptions. 5 a.m. every single day, even on weekends. Thomas swallowed quietly, knowing that wouldn't be easy. The second rule, he continued, you must go to bed on time. If you want to wake up early, you have to control your evenings. At that moment, Thomas realized that change wasn't just about adding a new habit, it meant transforming his entire lifestyle. And the third rule, Mr. Chun looked straight into his eyes. The first 21 days will be the hardest. Your body will resist. Your mind will find every excuse to quit. But if you push through, it will become part of who you are. Thomas stayed silent. He could feel that this wasn't just simple advice. It was a real test. 90 days, that was the time frame Mr. Chun had given him. For the first time in his life, Thomas didn't feel fear. He felt determination. He knew this path would be difficult, but it was also the only path that could lead him out of the life he was living. The first week was incredibly difficult for Thomas. Every morning, when the alarm rang at 5 a.m., his body resisted with everything it had. His eyes felt unbearably heavy, his head ached, and his limbs were sore from the night shift. In his mind, a familiar voice kept whispering, just sleep a little longer. Skipping one day won't hurt. But Thomas knew that if he gave up today, tomorrow he would find another excuse. So he forced himself to sit up, splash his face with cold water, and open his phone to study Excel. The first lessons were confusing and overwhelming, but he kept going, carefully writing down every small detail. At 6 a.m., he stepped outside and walked through the quiet streets. No one saw his effort. No one cheered him on. But in those lonely mornings, Thomas began to learn his first lesson in discipline. Change doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to never stop. After about 3 weeks of consistency, Thomas began to feel a clear shift. One morning, he woke up even before his alarm went off. The exhaustion and resistance he once felt were fading. His body was slowly adapting to the new rhythm. Waking up at 5 a.m. was no longer a battle. It had become a natural part of his life. The Excel lessons that once confused him were now starting to make sense. He wasn't just learning basic formulas anymore. He was beginning to apply them to real situations. Numbers were no longer meaningless. They were becoming tools that helped him see opportunities. Every day, he improved a little, and that small progress made all the difference. It wasn't just his skills that were changing, his body and mind were transforming too. His morning walks made him feel lighter, clearer, more alive. He started thinking more positively, planning for his future instead of avoiding it like before. Those quiet early hours became the most valuable part of his day. By the end of the second month, Thomas had completed several online courses in accounting and Excel. He grew more confident in conversations and at work. His coworkers noticed the difference and couldn't hide their surprise. "You seem like a completely different person lately. What happened?" Thomas simply smiled and replied, "Nothing special. I'm just changing my life, one morning at a time." By the third month, Thomas was no longer just learning. He began applying what he knew to his work. While working at the warehouse, he noticed that inventory management was still disorganized and inefficient. So he created a simple Excel spreadsheet to track incoming and outgoing goods, as well as any missing items. At first, he worked on it quietly, just to test himself. But when the tracking system started making the workflow clearer and more efficient, Thomas decided to show it to his supervisor. The supervisor was surprised and asked, "Where did you learn all this?" Thomas smiled and replied, "At 5 a.m. Not long after, the warehouse management found out. They realized Thomas was not just a night shift security guard, he was someone with initiative, a willingness to learn, and the ability to solve problems. And that recognition opened the door to a major opportunity, an office position with a higher salary. 1 year later, Thomas's life had changed in ways he once never dared to imagine. He was no longer an exhausted night shift security guard, he had become a stable accountant with a better income. He moved into a cleaner, more comfortable place And most importantly, he brought his mother to live with him so he could take care of her. Meals were no longer rushed or lacking. They became warm, peaceful, and complete. But the most valuable change wasn't the money or the new job. It was the person Thomas had become more disciplined, stronger, and fully aware of where he was heading. Every morning at 5 a.m., he still woke up not because he had to, but because it had become part of who he was. He understood that success is not a destination, but a series of small actions repeated every single day. Thomas's story is not a miracle. It is proof of a simple truth. Your life can change, starting with one small decision. If this story resonates with you, don't just listen and move on. Start tomorrow. Try waking up earlier. Give yourself 2 hours and stay consistent for 90 days. Comment 5 a.m. if you're ready to change, and let this be the first day you begin rewriting your life.